So welcome everyone to today's colloquium with Professor Dr. Imke Hoppe. She will discuss the topic of constructive climate communication from the audience perspective, promises, challenges, and pitfalls. Professor Hoppe will take a closer look at the concept of solution-based journalism for the field of climate communication with a perspective on audiences, and will discuss the potentials and limitations of the approach. Professor Hoppe joined LMU this year as a professor in the geography department. She finished her doctorate at the Technical University Ilmenau on the topic of digital communication and climate change. Before joining us, she worked at the DLR Institute of Systems Engineering for Future Mobility. She was previously deputy head of the Department of Children's Media at the Fraunhofer Institute for Digital Media Technology. She was also from 2017 to 2021. She researched and taught as a postdoc at the University of Hamburg and at the chair of journalism and communication studies on the topics of digitalized communication sustainability. We are delighted to have you join us here today, Professor Hoppe. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really happy to discuss this topic with this expert audiences with so many different disciplines involved and here at the Munich Science Communication Lab. So thank you very much. This is my agenda. First of all, I'd like to give you some ideas what the promise is and the motivation is for constructive journalism, especially in the field of climate change. Second, I will discuss some challenges and pitfalls, which discuss mainly this shortcoming of solutionism. And the center of my talk is the audience perspective. I start with a definition, or one of many definitions. So what is constructive climate communication? What wants it to achieve? And what are key dimensions for audience studies? Are that new ideas or are they just remix tapes? So, and then I outline some parallels to existing models of media effects and show you some of the current research, some of the rare empirical studies right now, which ask if these positive effects really occur. Yes, I will conclude with some remarks and ideas for research agenda, which could be then a basis for our discussion. Yes, I think we all know that climate coverage is event-driven, especially during climate conferences, IPCC reports, extreme weather events, social movements. We see peaks in the climate coverage on the issue. However, in between, there's a loud silence. So is that really a good answer from journalism to deal with chronic crisis? So of course, climate change will be with us for several decades. And what could be an answer for this kind of chronic crisis, which largely eludes the classical news values? There's a huge corpus on media effects that more communication and more coverage on climate change is important, but will probably not be enough. So we see again and again very limited effects of media usage on lifestyle changes or on societal relevant activities. Additionally, we have seen that this major frame in media, climate change as a catastrophe, has created a broad societal consensus to understand climate change as a problem. And this is super important and a very important and major step. But however, looking at climate action, neither at the micro nor at the macro level, this has led to corresponding changes. Additionally, and this is kind of a parallel process, we've seen major surveys, kind of the Reuters study, which have kind of demonstrated that we have a huge loss of trust in classical journalistic news media and we have a high news avoidance of classical journalistic news, especially if we look at younger people. So this has pushed existing self-reflection discussions within journalism. What effect do we as journalists actually provoke with this massive amount of negative news? And empirically, we indeed see in the last years a rather small shift from this apocalyptic climate futures to a more diverse and potentially more empowering reporting style. So one example is the documentary series in ZDF called Plan B, which explicitly deals with constructive journalism and tries to find new narratives for this climate change issue. And of course, there's light, there's shadows. This had led to several points of critique and high discussions within journalism, but also within journalism research. And one line of criticism can go back to Mike Hume, who said, for example, we should never think of climate change as a problem that can be solved. Suggesting what solving climate change would look like is just as hard as suggesting what solving democracy or solving the Anthropocene could mean. So what is our expectation towards communication? Do we really think or can make the promise that we can do something or can really solve something? So, and here I'd like to show a second line of critique, which can go back or can be drawn back to Morozov, I think he's called, to save everything, click here, the folly of technological solutionism. And maybe we all remember some examples of reporting, which, for example, stress that there are new ways to produce plastic straws, like using glass or using paper, ignoring the huge amount of waste, which grows and grows and grows. So looking at very small scale technological fixes can shift the focus towards actions which are not really helpful to make big steps towards climate action or towards really effective solutions. Yes, and the third critique comes from journalism itself. It's from an article in FAZ. These funny solutions for climate that we read every day. Do you know who is not issue fatigue or who's not bored by this kind of reporting? That are those who really live at these places, who think that's a luxury problem to claim or to be sorry about your own bad feelings about it. Yes, later on I will come back to these points of critique. But first of all, I'd like to deepen with you what are the hopes for this audience perspective and what is at least a more specific description what constructive journalism is all about. Audience research puts humans in the center and has backgrounds in many disciplines. I think there are different names for audiences. May they are named users, participants, discussants. However, humans and people are here in the center. And that's what I would like to discuss with you. So how to address the audiences. But first of all, what's the idea of constructive journalism? And to illustrate that, I would like to ask you to imagine one of these typical nature documentaries, maybe on moors, which introduce this nice scenario with a nice landscape, a lot of cute animals, and then it becomes clear that this paradise is threatened by climate change and moreover by biodiversity loss. Ending in 5 minutes with a possible solution for that threat, namely let's say an initiative which has some ideas how to protect it better. But after all, there's the final question, but do we have enough time to save this paradise? Yeah, and the counter narrative, the counter idea of constructive journalism could be to start with this kind of problem definition and then have more space to discuss certain solutions. A definition for constructive journalism, which is based on a huge meta study, is the following one. We propose that constructive journalism be regarded as an umbrella term that encompasses several ways to practice social responsible journalism, and solution journalism can be described as one form of constructive journalism. Yeah, the second definition is not just urgency, but agency, not just news, but what we can do about. And the last one is constructive journalism is journalism that reports in a balanced and factual manner on socially relevant problems and on ways to solve them, and is in this sense future-oriented. So as an additional perspective for journalism, not as the one and only silver bulletin which fits to all journalistic practices. Yeah, here's also a self-description by constructive journalists. I wouldn't agree to every stamp which is made here, especially on investigative journalism. However, I think it helps to once again make clear what's the difference, what it's all about. So the focus is on tomorrow, on inspiring audiences, on asking what now and how, to make them curious, to be more a facilitator than someone who judges, and not to find some victims and crooks, but to show and discuss some solutions and best practices. Especially if you look for the emphasis on audiences, the following potentials are discussed with a view on audience studies. It is hoped that it helps to avoid issue fatigue and media fatigue, one of the major reasons of media outlets not to report too much about the issue. So to be afraid that maybe if we report one more about climate change, people are not willing to look any article or any news bit about it. A second hope for the audiences is to help to reduce polarization by the stress on positive and realistic visions for future challenges, rather than looking at villains in the past. A third hope is to be able to really look more not on the kind of well-informed journalist who understands the scientific base very correctly, but really to better understand what the audiences know already and what they do not know, and maybe what is also different knowledge needs they have with respect to, for example, climate cultures or different climate cultures. A fourth vision is kind of supporting the wish for transformative and civic engagement. Engage different values and cultures in defining important problems and discussing possible solutions. Yeah, and respectively, you find here the dimensions which are important for audience studies. So first of all, we would be interested in understanding, if we do empirical research, how that really works like for the audiences, which we stress so much. Do they really have the impression if an article or a documentary is made like that they more understand what are the central solutions? So do they first of all really have that feeling what the solution is? They understand it better. Do they have the feeling that they understand better what the next steps are? And the third dimension is kind of diversity and inclusion. to what extent do audiences have the impression that very different people have their say and can contribute to, and can contribute with their perspective into the discourse. Also interesting for audience studies is, of course, the feeling in how far they feel empowered. So if they have now the feeling that they are encouraged and more supported to understand the issue better and to address it by themselves. Therefore, it is interesting to see if audiences have the impression that they better understand the central aspects. So of course, the cognitive facet in use was always present. Here's more the stress on the explanation part. So it's this process of not just giving information, but explaining a certain context is in the center. And the last dimension here is this co-creation. So to what extent do audiences have the impression that they can contribute to the topic? Yes. Some of these dimensions are rather new, I would say, but others are well established in other research fields. And one of the looks back I'd like to work with you together is the tradition and environmental communication. You've seen that there are kind of many dimensions which are of interest. Can one news article or one stimulus or one pattern really fulfill all these requirements? And of course, there's a need for a certain focus. So should we focus more on the kind of cognitive part or more on the action-oriented part, on the behavioral part, or on the participation part that for me is quite overwhelming, what they all require or what they all aim for and want to achieve. So from my viewpoint, the research from Jacques to sort a bit what is really important to expect in the context of environmental communication helps a lot. And just to sort where's the focus of this communication? Is it kind of to help to understand the problem? Is it more kind of rooted in action-oriented research, means to give really information which helps to, for example, makes a step from using a car to using a bicycle, or stop to or change their eating lifestyle. So then you maybe, if you have this stress, you have really different needs for knowledge than if you have or if you address different goals or different functions of communication. And the third is here this empowerment orientation. And also what of course is also important to add on this current discussion on constructive journalism is to ask in how far the assumed effects have a really theoretical backbone, I would say, as a communication scholar. So some ideas are not new, I would say, but have a lot of parallels to well-established media effects models. For example, of course, framing. There, the solution frame, the problem frame is very, very established. And here, of course, we have the same assumption that a problem frame affects people differently than a solution frame. A third theoretical backbone is, from my perspective, the social learning theory from Bandura, and the idea that role models, showing best practices, could lead to imitation behavior, and thus this kind of social learning. Third, we have a long tradition of understanding political participation in climate communication. For example, this reference to the two-step flow, and that, of course, opinion leader maybe inform better or more in mass media, and then make sense in their community, make meaning out of it, and spread the information. So very old ideas. And however, I think they pop up in this new discourse of constructive climate communication and could be made fruitful to connect these lines of discussion. Yeah, as a last step in this part of the audience studies, I'd like to have a look on the current empirical studies on that. We have a large tradition on understanding media effects in climate communication, which traditionally focus in the quantitative tradition on attitudes, knowledge, and behavior, from the qualitative methods more on more complex forms of meaning and sense making. So in the existing studies, as far as I know, are mostly quantitative. And the first study I would like to give you a very short highlight on is a study by Maurer, Jandura, and Fove. And they made an experimental design and manipulated two variations of an article. One has a problem definition or problem description, and the other group has also a solution definition or a solution frame. And they indeed found out that the positive emotional response differed between the groups. And this, as a kind of chain of effects, had positive effects on the efficacy beliefs and on the attention to talk with people about what they learned by the media, but no effect on the intention to act more climate friendly. The second study I'd like to at least cite here is by Schäfergräber, Söflo, and Lechler. They as well found positive emotional responses to this solution reporting style. However, they did not find that people deeper elaborated on the news or that they afterwards seek more information. Side note, in both cases, they tested, I think, information on Corona towards a climate crisis, and both seek more information afterwards, after the stimulus, but they didn't differ between the solution frame and the problem frame. Yes, so now here's my short summary. Constructive climate journalism is a broad and global trend, which includes climate journalism as well. New networks support education and collaboration between practitioners and researchers. It aims to counter issue fatigue and media fatigue, polarization, information overload, and negative feelings of helplessness, fear, and inaction. It aims to produce media content which has solutions on climate change as a main focus of stories and news, is oriented towards the next steps, gives diverse people a voice, gives context and explains and inspires co-creation. It is criticized to produce feel-good journalism, the propaganda of techno-fixes and small-scale actions. It is till now subject of rather rare empirical studies, which underline the importance of positive feelings as a precondition for further media effects, like pushing face-to-face communication and other real-world reflections and steps. So my own lessons learned from that: no constructive climate communication without science communication. I think the critique I cited is really important. So there were too much small-scale solution, having a broad audience and a broad focus. So, and what could help to avoid these shortcomings, I think more references towards what science know about climate action and what is to do, either from social sciences, as from natural sciences, and from technology-oriented studies. It must include the full diversity of disciplines. I think that would be really happy to kind of feed constructive journalism with important solutions. Both stress, however, that this is not a unilinear process, but we highly need more dialogical forms of communication. And I think, indeed, to me, it's not already clear how we can extend the concept to other forms of transformative communication. So not only mass communication, but also, for example, on communication on the regional, on the local level. What are regional audiences, publics, media, and how to get them into these decisions. Point two, is that I'm quite skeptic that it will get easier with the focus on solutions. I think, especially in light of the ongoing discourse of delay, which kind of shifts skepticism towards solutions in the front line of climate skeptics, is highly contested in publics. And the second, or the last point here, would be that we have kind of a lack of long-term empirical studies related or deeply related to certain media characteristics. Yes, thank you very much for your attention. I would be happy to discuss these points with you together.